Hi everyone, so today we're going to talk about chapter 4, which is about graphing of sine and cosine. We already finished chapter 3, so today we're going to learn how to graph sine function and cosine function. As you remember that y is the same thing as, so y is the same thing as, what is that? Y is the same thing as sine, right? On unit circle, right? On unit circle. So on unit circle, sine value is the same thing as the y, right? So if you look at my unit circle here, and we only talk about sine, so we're gonna just focus on the y value only. So if you look at unit circle here at 0 degree, my sine value is the same thing as y, which is 0. And at pi over 2, my sine value or y value is 1. At pi, my sine value, all the same thing as y, which is 0. And at 3 pi over 2, my y value is -1. Okay, and then if you go back to the same point, which is 2 pi, which is also 0. So I'm going to use that value and then plug it into this. Okay, so at sine 0 degree, right? At sine 0 degree, my value of sine is 0. All right, and then at sine pi over 2, my y value is 1. Okay, and then at pi, my sine value is 0. And then at at 3 pi over 2, my sine value is -1. And then at 2 pi, my sine value is 0. Okay, that if you rotate counterclockwise, right? So again, when you rotate counterclockwise, you get positive angle. Now, this one, we want to talk about negative angle. So you have to look at a clockwise. Okay, so we go this way instead. So if you start from 0, you rotate clockwise. This one's going to be negative pi over 2. Right? The same thing as negative 90. And at negative pi over 2, my y value is -1. And then if you keep rotate it, you come over here, that's become negative pi. And my sine value is going to be 0. And then if you rotate all the way to here, that's going to be -3 pi over 2. Okay, and my sine value is +1. And then if you rotate all the way to the same point where we started, that is make it -2 pi. So at -2 pi, my sine value here is 0. All right, so I'm going to use this value and plot it into here. So my x-axis here represent the angle. Okay, x-axis here represent the angle. Okay, and the y here is going to be the value of sine. Okay, so let's plot it. So at 0, my sine value also 0, angle 0. And at angle pi over 2, my y value is 1. And then at angle pi, my sine value back to 0. And then at 3 pi over 2, right, sine 3 pi over 2, the y value is -1. And then at 2 pi, this one's going to be at 0. So if you connect this one, this is like a parabola, open downward. Right? Yeah. And then this one's going to be open upward. It's like this. All right. So that's how sine function look like. Let's finish on the negative side also. So at negative pi over 2, I get -1, which is right here. And then at negative pi, my sine value at negative pi over 2, negative pi, which is 0. And then at -3 pi over 2, my sine value is +1. And then at negative pi, back to 0. So you connect this, you get that, which is parabola open upward. Okay, now this one's going to be parabola open downward. So here we go. That's how sine. Okay, let me move. So here, that's how sines look like. Okay, so in this class, we're only talking about, I will ask you only graph just one period. or 1 revolution. So if you look at here, you and also I think I'm gonna just ask you just 1 revolution, which is start from 0 to 2 pi, right? So you travel from 0 all the way back to 2 pi. That is 1 revolution. And also this also called, you know, normal cycle for sine. So that's normal cycle from sine is start from 0 all the way, so it's called normal cycle, all the way to 2 pi. Here we go. All right, so that's normal cycle for sine. So start from 0 and end it at 2 pi, okay? 1 revolution, okay? So let's continue on to about period. So what's period? Period is the distance where they started and then where they end it. So since we just talk about normal cycle here, so sine start at 0 and then end at 2 pi. So the distance they travel is 0 to 2 pi. So the period is just 2 pi. So again, period is the distance that they travel, okay? All right, so period here is 2 pi. How about domain? So imagine if this one keep going, all right, you're gonna graph another period. Oh, by the way, the whole thing here is 2 period, okay? But we only talk about normal cycle, just 1 period from 0 to 2 pi only. All right, so imagine this one keep going, all right? Keep going like that. This one keep going like that. And domain for that one is domain. Well, domain is on the x-axis from left to right. So domain, if this one keep going, that means domain is gonna be from negative infinity to positive infinity. That's domain for sine. And the range is up and down. So if you look at here, the lowest point of this graph is, yes, okay. So that's going to be -1. And then the highest point, which is 1. So -1, right? Because below that, there's no graph. And then you go all the way to 1. And above that, there's no graph. So here we go, that's the range, okay? And the minimum, which is the lowest point on the graph, which is -1. And the maximum, which is 1. So in other words, your range is the minimum comma the maximum, okay? Right? So that is the range, okay? And normal cycle for this is going to be from 0 to 2 pi, okay? So that's a normal cycle for sine, okay? Normal cycle for sine. So now we're going to talk about determine whether sine function or y equal to sine is an even or odd function, okay? It's even or odd function. So this one we can check it by, you know, I don't know if you guys remember the algebra. So algebra say that if you have odd function, so odd function, if you have f of negative x equal to f of x, that is an odd function. If it's not an odd function, that's going to be even function. So they have only 2 of them, either odd or even, okay? So let me give you example of this one. So let's take a look example here. Okay, so if I have my function here, which is x equal to x cube, it's like that, okay? X cube like that. So if I choose my h to be negative h, so I plug negative h to this one. So I plug in negative h, right? So you evaluate it at negative h. So that means this one's going to be negative h cube, right? But we know that since this one is odd, oh, I just say odd already. So since the exponent here is to the power 3, that means negative stay the same, because this one is the same thing as negative h times negative h times negative h. That means it's still negative. And then a cube. But I know that h to the power 3 here is equal to what? F of h, isn't it? So that means I can replace this one with my f of h. And I still have negative, right? So I still have to carry negative with me. And a cube here is the same thing as f of h. So as you can see that I have f of negative x is equal to negative f of h. So by definition, that is going to be a odd function. That's going to be odd function, right? It's an odd function. So for even functions, it will be like this, okay? Even function, it should be like this. So you put f of x, or negative x, and you go back to f of x. That is called even function. So we're going to talk about that later on. So now we just focus on the odd function. So I'm going to test it to see if sine function here is the odd function or not. If it's not the odd function, that means it's definitely is even function, okay? So I'm going to test that. So to test that, I'm going to choose a negative, okay? So I'm going to choose a negative angle, okay? Negative angle. And if this one odd function, that means this one must be equal to sine of pi over 2, right? If this one true, that means they are odd function. If it's not true, that means they must be an even function. So I said that sine of negative x, or negative pi over 2 is the same thing as negative x, must be equal to negative a function sine pi over 2. So let's take a look if this one equal or not, okay? I want to know if it's true or not. So if you look at here, if you look at the unit circle, that's the one we just did, then you rotate this one, remember, on the unit circle, your sine is the same thing as y, so negative pi over 2, my y value is negative 1. So that means this one is going to be negative 1. Is it equal to, so that's what I want to know it. Okay, I need to carry the negative, so it's negative here is in front of that. Okay, what is sine pi over 2 equal to? So you look at unit circle again. So now we look at the positive angle, so we go this way instead. So we get positive 1. So here we go. So this means true. True. So this is true. That means sine is a odd function. So sine is the odd function. Okay. So this means sine is the odd function. All right. Sine is the odd function. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the next one. So we want to find an equation which name all the root of y equal to sine. So we want to do that. So to do that, we want to find all the root. That means all you have to do just, in order to find the root, that means when the y equal to 0, right? When the y equal to 0. So that means, in other words, we were looking for the x-intercept. So I want to find the x-intercept. Oh, let me move it up. Yeah. So I want to find all the x-intercept. So how do you find x-intercept? Well, in order to find x-intercept, you need to let y equal to 0. Okay, that's how you find x-intercept. That means the same thing as find all the root. That means find all the x-intercept. So if you look at the graph here, we're looking for to find this point, this point, this point, this point, this point. That is all the x-intercept because they intercept at the x-axis. So that's what we're looking for. Okay, so that means when we have x-intercept here, there's no y. Y have to be equal to 0, right? Y have to be equal to 0 here. Y have to be equal to 0 here. So that means I'm going to set this, my function here, equal to 0. So y equal to 0 equal to sine of x. Okay? Sine of x. So, and x here is represent an angle, right? So what angle that y equal to 0? Alright? So that means x here, that's represent angle, is must be equal to n pi. Okay, n pi. So what is n? Well, n is an integer, so n it could be negative. N is not a fraction. N is not a decimal. It's a whole number with a negative number. So it's called integer, right? So n it could be, so n here, where n is from negative infinity all the way. Okay. It's integer. Alright, so that's what n is. Okay, so let's take a look if this makes sense. Okay, so if n equal to 0, right? If n equal to 0, let me go up here, down here. So if n equals to 0, 0 times pi, that's going to be 0. That means my angle must be equal to 0 here we go. That's my x-axis. When n equal to 1, right? N equal to 1, that's going to be pi. So if you look at your picture, that's going to be right here. That's your x-intercept. And if n equal to 2, that's going to be 2 pi. That is point right here. So when n equal to -1, that's going to be negative pi. And then if n equal to -2, that's going to be, right, -2. We cannot see it. Okay, -2, that is going to be -2 pi. So here we go. That is all the, that's how you find all the root of that function. Okay, that is for sine. That's for sine. Oh, can't see it. Okay, that is for sine. So in other words, it's mean root is the same thing as x-intercept. Okay, and yep. And in order to find x-intercept or root, you have to let y equal to 0, right? Yep. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next page to see if anything that I have to talk about. All right, so we just talked about graph of sine. Now all we have to do is do the same thing, but in this time we're gonna talk about how to graph on sine function instead. So again, on unit circle, right? On unit circle, as you know that cosine is the same thing as h value, right? As the h value. So this means on this one we only focus on x-axis only. I mean h value only. So at angle 0, your h here is going to be 1. At pi over 2, your h here is going to be 0. And at pi, your cosine is going to be -1. At 3 pi over 2, your cosine is going to be 0. And if you're going back, your cosine of 2 pi is going to be 1. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to do a counterclockwise first, okay? Which is the angle is going to be positive. So I'm going to do that first. So this means at cosine 0, okay? 0 angle, okay? Cosine 0 is equal to 1. As you can see, that's going to be 1. And then at pi over 2, your cosine is going to be 0. Okay. And at pi, your cosine is going to be -1. And 3 pi over 2, your cosine is going to be 0. And then at 2 pi, your cosine equal to 1. Okay. Now we're going to take a look clockwise instead. Okay. So clockwise, we have to go this way. So you go this way, that's going to be negative pi over 2. So at negative pi over 2, your cosine can be 0. And if you go back to here, that's going to be negative pi. At negative pi, your cosine is going to be -1. And then at if you go all the way to here, that's going to be negative 3 pi over 2. At negative 3 pi over 2, your cosine is going to be 0. And then if you go back all the way to here, that's going to be negative 2 pi. Your cosine is going to be 1. Okay, let's plot that. So I'm going to do on the positive side first. So at 0, okay, again, at here represent your angle, right? So when angle equal to 0, cosine is 1. So this is a little bit different from sine. So at pi over 2, my cosine here is going to be 0. And then at pi, my cosine is going to be -1. At 3 pi over 2, my cosine is going to be 0. And then at 2 pi, my cosine is 1. So if you do correctly, this point here, they line it up perfectly. Look at that. If you connect this all together, it look like a V. Okay, right? It look like a V. But we're not going to do that. So we're going to curve this one a little bit like this. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, like that. Okay, so this is like a parabola. Okay, and then this one will go like this. Here we go. So this is like almost like a bell shape. Okay, like a bell shape, upside down. Okay, upside down, like a bell shape. Oh, if I can see it. Okay, like a bell shape. Okay, so now we're gonna do on the negative side the same thing. I'm gonna plot the point first before I connect them. So at negative pi over 2, that's gonna be 0. And then at negative pi, that's gonna be -1. And then at negative 3 pi over 2, that's back to 0. And then at the negative pi, 2 pi, add back to 1. So I'm gonna connect this one again. So the same thing. So this one should be like a parabola. Okay, so now I'm gonna connect this like that, like that. Okay. All right, so that's how cosine look like. Okay, that's how the graph of cosine look like. So I'm gonna talk about a normal cycle for cosine. So normal cycle for cosine is the same thing. So let's take a look just one revolution, which is they start from 0 to 2 pi, right? So this means from 0 here, that is normal cycle. Normal cycle for cosine all the way to 2 pi. Okay, that's normal cycle. So okay, so let's take a look at a period. So period is the same thing, from since they start from 0 to 2 pi, right? The amount that they travel from here to here, which is just 2 pi. Okay, and domain, so imagine this one keep going like this, keep going forever, and this one keep going forever. Domain from x, from left to right, right, on the x-axis. So your domain is going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity. And the range, right, it's the same thing as your minimum comma your maximum. So the lowest point here, which is negative 1. And then the highest point, right, is 1. Okay, that's the range. Now we talk about the minimum. So the minimum is the lowest point on the graph, which is negative 1. And the highest point, which is 1. All right, and normal cycle. So normal cycle, we start from exactly at 0 and then all the way to 2 pi. So 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so now we're gonna test it to see the same thing. Is it the cosine is odd or even function? So let's take a look at, and we know that sine is odd function, right? So let's take a look at this one. So if cosine is even function, that means f of negative x must be equal to f of x. So I'm going to just take a look cosine and choose a negative angle. So if this one true, that means if I choose negative angle, this one must be equal to a positive angle. Okay, let's see if they are true or not. So this is even. So let's see if this one true. Okay, so and you can look at unit circle you want to. So if you look at the unit circle, you want it to be negative pi. So if you rotate the clockwise at negative pi here, my cosine is negative 1. Okay, negative 1. So go back to this. That's going to be negative 1. Okay, we want to know if they equal to cosine pi or not. So if you go to counterclockwise, all right, and at pi, your value also negative 1. So they are equal. They are equal. Okay, so that means cosine are even function. So cosine x or s, all right, is an even. Okay, it's an even function. All right, it's an even function. Okay, so now we're gonna take a look how to find all the root for cosine function. So we do the same thing. Root is mean the same thing as x-intercept. So root is mean x-intercept. Okay, that's mean we have to let y equal to what? We have to let y equal to 0. That's how you find all the root. In other words, we want to find all the x-intercept here, here, and here, and more, right? And so on, right? You want to find all of them. So to do that, we have to let y equal to 0. So if y equal to 0, that means I have cosine of x equal to 0. All right. So that means x equal to what then? What angle that make your cosine function equal to 0? Okay. So if you look at your graph here, I know that they are 0 at 2 pi. So if I want to add something to get into this point and and we repeat the pattern. So if you add something and then get to the next one, so how do we do that? So I'm going to start at pi over 2, which is that's one of the x-intercept, but we want to find all the x-intercept, right? So what should I add? Okay, so if you look at here, from here to here, that's just pi, isn't it? So if you take pi over 2, add pi, you're gonna get 3 pi over 2, right? So I bet if you add another pi to 3 pi over 2, you get another intercept, right? And so on. So the same way on this way, on the other side too, right? So to do that, I just add what? Pi, right? Pi. So this means if I take pi over 2, I add pi, I get 3 pi over 2, and then if I add another pi, so I'm gonna get another intercept, the same way here, right? So you subtract pi, you get this, you subtract pi, you get this, okay? So to do that, I need just put n pi, where n, again, is the integer. The n here, it should be dot, 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 from negative infinity to negative, and positive infinity, right? So your n is integer, okay? Integer just a positive and negative whole number, okay? So if n equal to 0, that's going to be 0, so you get only what? Pi over 2. If n equal to 1, you add pi to that, right? Because if n equal to 1, that's going to be just pi, so pi plus 2 pi, pi over 2, that's going to be 3 pi over 2, right? And then if n equal to 2, you know, you add that and so on, okay? So this means this is the formula to find all the root of the cofunction. I mean the cosine function, okay? Oh, you cannot see it, sorry. All right. So that it is a cosine graph and how to find all the root for cosine. All right. So I'm going to move on to the next page. Here. So we're going to learn how to find, we're going to put this one all together, all the information, what we're just talking about sine, cosine, right? So the main for sine and cosine, they are the same, from negative infinity to positive infinity, from negative infinity to positive infinity. Okay, the range is going to be the same also. It's going to be negative 1 to positive 1, negative 1 to positive 1. Okay, and the period, okay, the period is the same. It's going to be 2 pi. Okay, and the intercept or the root for the sine is going to be just n pi. Okay, and cosine is different. It's going to be pi over 2 plus n pi. And is it the sine is odd or even? Sine is odd function and cosine is even function. Okay, and normal cycle, they are the same. Here we go. That's what we just talked about. Okay, that's what we're just talking about. So okay, so the next topic is talk about amplitude. Okay, so I'm not gonna go over this one. We can skip this one. I will show you the easy way to find the amplitude. Okay, so we can cross this out. So I'm gonna move on to the next page. Okay, we just identify the amplitude. We don't need to find it. Okay. All right, so here we go. So the next exercise here, they want us to graph sine, okay, y equal to 3 sine, okay, and they want us to do it by plotting point, okay, by plotting point. So as you can see, they give us some table here, okay, some table, okay. So how do we going to do this? Okay, so first, okay, scratch a graph of y equal to sine and y equal to 3 sine on the interval 0 to 2 pi. Okay, 0 to 2 pi. Oh, let me go down. Sorry. All right, so as you know that if we graph this one, okay, if we graph this one, okay, we're gonna do, okay, for sine at 0, this is going to be 0, right? What we just did, right? We did earlier. And at pi over 2, right? Sine pi over 2 is going to be, oh, not negative, my bad. So, not negative. Okay, at sine pi over 2, my y value is going to be 1, positive 1. Okay, yeah. And you look at the unit circle again, right? Because sine is the same thing as y value. So at 0 here, that's also 0, right? It's over here, this is pi over 2. That means your y is going to be 1, but your h is going to be 0. And here, your y is going to be 0, and h is negative 1, right? And then over here, okay, that is going to be h equal to 0, y is negative 1, okay? But we talk about sine, so we just focus on the what? We only focus on the y value. So at 0, oh, this is 1, my bad. So at angle 0, right? This is angle 0. Your sine is going to be 0. Again, we focus on the y value only. And then at pi over 2, your sine is going to be what? Positive 1. And then at pi, your sine here is going to be 0. And then at 3 pi over 2, your sine here is going to be negative 1. And then at 2 pi, your sine should be 0. Right? So let's plot that. So 0, 0, this is going to be at pi over 2, so that's going to be 1. We already did that earlier. So at pi, it's going to be 0. And then at 3 pi over 2, that's going to be negative 1. And then at 2 pi, we back to 0. So this is like a parabola, right? A little bit flat here. Here we go. So that's how your sine y equal to sine look like. So now let's take a look what happened if you have y equal to 3 sine. So how that graph look like. Okay. Well, this one, as you can see here, this is not, the 3 here is nothing to do with your angle. So this is only affect your y value only. So your angle stay the same, but the y value here is going to change it. So that means your angle here is still at 0. Right? And your y value here is going to be 0. And you take 0 times 3, that's still 0. Okay? Now, again, like I said, your angle is not going to change, right? Your angle at pi over 2, but your h, without 3 here, your y value should be 1. So now you've been multiplied by 3, right? So now that means this one becomes 3. Okay? Now, at pi, your y value should be 0. And then that been multiplied by 3, so 0 times 3 is still 0. And then at 3 pi over 2,